Welcome, and thank you for joining the Toxic Mold Sex podcast presented by Malachi's Message Foundation. My name is Miriam Khalili, and I'm joined by my co-host, Emily Rachel.
Thank you, Miriam, and welcome everyone. Today we have the honor of having PJ Harlow on with us to share her personal mold story and what happened to her. So welcome, PJ. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you guys for having me. It's super exciting to be here. I love you both. So it's an honor to be here and talk today.
PJ, do you mind to tell everybody what was your life like for you and your family before you experienced mold?
Sure. I think I'll go back a little bit, even further than like right before everything happened, just to give some good context on my own health and my own prior experiences, because I feel like a lot of women may resonate with that. So Peter and I had just gotten married, and I already had 4 kids at this point, 2 of which are older, 2 which lived with us. So I was very much in kind of the honeymoon period with my husband, and just it was a really, really happy time for me. It was kind of like I finally found my person, and my relationships prior to that just really weren't the one. When I was young, 18, I had my first daughter, and wasn't really prepared for that. But I was also in a very abusive relationship with her father. And I got pregnant again when I was 19. And the relationship was very, very difficult. And I knew that I already had one child, so I couldn't bring another kid into this situation that I was in. And we didn't have a lot of money, and it was just really bad, and very volatile, violent, and just not even a great place for my daughter already. And so I actually gave up my daughter for adoption. And that was probably one of the more difficult decisions in my life. And after that, I really regretted it. And so the trauma from that really affected me for many, many years. And I went to a lot of therapy and a lot of counseling. And that relationship obviously didn't last, didn't work out. But I got remarried and had 2 more kids. And I think that relationship was really just to bring those 2 kids into the world. That was really its purpose. And I'm grateful for that. But it really wasn't my person. And so Peter was my person. It was finally the opportunity for me to be with somebody that I truly was in love with, for all the right reasons. I think we get so confused through our lifetime. What does love really mean to us, right? And so I was excited to really kind of open up this new chapter of my life. And honestly, I think it was probably one of the happiest times. And I was also very healthy at the time. I was going to the gym 6-7 days a week. I was actually a vegetarian during this period. And I had been a vegetarian probably for about 3 years. And Peter was as well. So, at that time, I thought that was really nutritiously healthy. And maybe for some people that works, but later on, it really didn't work for me. And I feel like it contributed a little bit to some deficiencies, perhaps as protein deficiencies. But, all in all, I would consider myself to be a more alternative holistic minded type individual. This is really pre-crunchy. But I really did, take the time to focus on my health. And we were trying to have a more addition to our family. I wanted to have another baby. And I felt like my clock was kind of ticking because I had just turned 40. And so I was trying to do everything I could to kind of prepare my body to conceive again. And I had a very stressful, long time job. I was almost there 10 years before I started to get sick. And I actually worked for an insurance company. So you'd think that I would have known a lot about mold and water damage, but they really don't teach you that in insurance either. But in general, I was pretty healthy, and I was also pretty happy, although I had a lot of past, traumas, you could say. But I had felt like I dealt with all of them. And so, it kind of happened very strangely, and it didn't come all at once. It was very kind of waxing and waning. New symptoms would kind of just appear, and I really just normalized it at first. My hands started hurting, and I thought it was carpal tunnel because I typed every day, and I had been in an office pretty much my whole career. I had been a claims adjuster, and then I was in property and casualty, and then I moved to be a manager. And so I moved to all these positions, but I was always on a computer. So I thought, man, it's finally getting me. I've got carpal tunnel. Then I thought it was arthritis. I even got all these nerve tests done on my hands and my wrists, and nobody could really tell me anything. They were just like, well, it's normal, it's nothing. And then I started to get really tired, and the fatigue kind of kicked in. And of course, I told myself it was just I was working too much and that I was just stressed. And then my hair started to fall out. And I really started to get scared then because, I was picking up gobs and gobs of hair in the shower. And I didn't even say anything to Pete at first because, Pete's a few years younger than I am. And I had just turned 40, and that was a big deal for me, turning 40. And it was kind of like, I don't know. I felt like, I don't know. When you're a woman and you turn 40, it's kind of like, it's a big one. And I felt like I was starting to notice, like, my face started changing a little bit. And I noticed that I felt like, I also felt like I was aging dramatically. And I didn't know if this is just my imagination or is this really happening? And I started to notice some skin changes. My face was breaking out, and I felt like my pores were getting bigger. My jaw, the areas right here was starting to like sag on me. And so I finally broke down and told my husband, like, hey, I'm not feeling well. And, my feet started to hurt. And I remember we were at a thrift shop one time. We always used to like to go thrift shopping. And my feet got really swollen and so swollen, I had to take my shoes off in the car. And I was like, what is happening? Like, the only time this ever happened before was like after I had my daughter, my feet swelled up one time. So it was just like all these random things were happening, and none of them made any sense. And so I felt like I was going to the doctor repeatedly for these random issues, my hands, then my joints. Then I was going to the gynecologist because I started to miss my periods and my hair was falling out. So I didn't know, is this like a hormonal thing? My face was breaking out, and every test they did was normal. And so I started to feel like, is this just all stress? Because that's what it kind of felt like the doctors were pointing to, because they kept asking me like, what's happening in your life? And I was so perplexed because I was happy. We were trying to have a baby. Like things were good for once. I mean, we weren't terribly wealthy, and we certainly struggled money wise. That was always probably one of the biggest problems we had, was just when you're blue collar, or below that, it's hard, trying to afford 2 cars, and and we also didn't have very good health insurance at the time, so it was just pretty stressful. But my symptoms started to progressively get worse, and I changed doctors, and I went to another doctor, and he basically said that they ran all these tests, inflammatory markers and allergy type tests, and all these tests, and everything came back normal. And then I think the turning point was when I started to have cognitive problems. I started to stutter and choke on my drinks. I couldn't drink anything out of a cup, and I would just start choking randomly. And so my primary care doctor decided to send me to a neurologist. And I went and I did a MRI, I did a sleep study, I did all of these, very expensive tests, because they were thinking I possibly had MS because of the whole stuttering thing. Plus, I started to lose my memory. I couldn't remember things. And just, I felt like I was a mess. And my job started to also suffer too. So that was a big deal. And I remember having like meetings with my boss, and he was really giving me a hard time over my performance. As a manager, I had like really high expectations of me, and I was, in charge of a team, and I was having to leave all the time for all these doctor appointments and calling out because I didn't feel good. And I wasn't lying, I was telling the truth about everything. And to some degree, I understood where he's coming from. As a owner of a business, you have to have, reliable employees, but, I had almost been there for 10 years. And so I expected a little bit more empathy from my employers as I was trying to navigate something literally wrong with me. And so that was kind of like the first kind of realization that, wow, I'm being pegged as like an exaggerating woman, like I don't look sick, right? And I look fine. And so Peter was amazingly supportive, and that's one of the greatest things that I'm grateful for, was that he was definitely my rock during that period, because again, by all accounts, I looked normal. I was just having all of these things happening to me, and it was very much this mystery. And when we got back the results of all the tests, again, all these things take time. As I'm telling you this story, it's consolidated, and it sounds like, oh, this could all happen in a month, but really this is happening over 3 to 6 months of time. And, going back and forth, and, just to make one doctor appointment, you have to wait, and, it's 2 weeks, and then this test takes another 2 weeks, and then this test takes another 2 weeks. So it was really over a 3 to 6 month period that I probably went to 20 different appointments, and ended up seeing neurologists, endocrinologists, arthritic type doctors, rheumatologists. I was seeing all kinds of physicians and specialists. And I did probably every blood test you could possibly think of. I was tested for, MS, Parkinson's, they went down the whole kind of line of different illnesses, autoimmune, and nothing was coming up. I didn't have any inflammatory markers. It was, you're just normal. And then when I went to the rheumatologist, I'll never forget that appointment. He did say that I had fibromyalgia. And I was like, okay, fibromyalgia. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What is fibromyalgia? Why do you get that? And he said, well, it's a grouping of symptoms. And I was like, okay, but what's it caused by? It's a grouping of symptoms. And it was like, the answer was not enough for me. Like, it just didn't make sense. Why do I have this grouping of symptoms now? Why is all this happening to me now? What was the trigger? What is the root cause? It just didn't make any sense to me. And so, time went on, a few months went by, and then Peter started to get symptoms, and he started to get pain in his shoulders. And at first he said he thought it was just from working, and lifting stuff at work and, doing hard work at the plant. And then his shoulders started rotating. And then he was like, oh my gosh, do I have fibromyalgia? And we were like trying to figure it out. And then we were like, oh, it must be the bed, because the bed is old. We really need a new bed. That's what it is. And my back started hurting after that. And then in the mornings, I would wake up and my hands would be stiff as a board. Like, I couldn't bend my fingers. And it was the strangest thing. And then my whole body started to kind of seize, and it seize as in it would be stiff. And I literally, Peter would have to pull me over out of the bed to help me get up until my joints and my muscles would start to warm up, and then I could kind of move around and get going. But it started happening every day. And then, we didn't know what was happening. Crazy enough as it sounds, we even thought at one point, is the house haunted? Is this what's doing this to me? And is this what's making us sick or something? We knew, is it in our environment, but we didn't think further enough. Eventually we would, but we even had it's probably crazy, but I even took the kids one day, and it was me, Pete, and the two younger kids, and I sat everybody in a little circle, and I poured salt around my house. I'm not lying. This is absolutely true. I was like, okay, maybe there's some evil spirits in the house or something, and maybe they're trying to tell us something. So we're just going to sit here and say, you're not welcome here. And I had my children chanting this with Pete. It was the funniest thing looking back, but we were desperate to try to figure out what is happening. And then a few more months went by, and it was we should have opened a wing at the hospital at this point for us. Peter's appendix ruptured. He got a serious infection. Once we came back to the house, he got another infection. And if I hadn't have said, let's go back to the hospital, he could have possibly died. And, my son and my daughter started getting symptomatic. Suddenly, my daughter had asthma. Never had any problems before. And all of a sudden she was like, Mom, every time I run, I can't breathe. And so I was taking the kids to the pediatrician back and forth. My youngest son all of a sudden started to gain a bunch of weight. In a month's period, he gained 20 pounds, and his nose would bleed every single time he'd walk into the house. Nose would start bleeding. And he started to get migraines. And so I took the kids to the doctor. And then of course the pediatrician is telling me, oh, this is normal. Your daughter just has asthma and your son just needs to eat more protein. And he's not getting enough protein with your vegetarian diet. So I started to really try to focus on our nutrition, and my son's migraines continued. And I started taking him to specialists. And I literally remember the day that it happened, when we took him to the migraine specialist. And it was just like, again, I was starting to feel like doctors were looking at me like I was making all of this up, and just, how like when you get the side eye and people kind of are looking at you like they don't take you seriously, like they're listening to you. But I constantly felt like nobody was taking me serious. Like my words didn't have the integrity that they used to. And, I know what Munchausen syndrome is. And but I never thought that people would look at me like that, just because I looked at myself like I'm a respected individual. Like, I do everything right. I take care of my kids, I'm ethical, like I work hard, and so this was new for me to kind of have that experience. And by this point, my own personal health was becoming to the degree where I would say it was becoming debilitating. It was no longer just interruptive of my life, but it was starting to become where I couldn't function on my own. At night after work, Peter would have to carry me up the steps, and I would have these like, I don't even know what to call it, but these like moments where my back would start hurting out of nowhere, and like piercing pain to the point where I'd have to like get on my hands and knees and just curl up into a ball and just sit there, trying to let it pass. And this would be like when we're all in the middle of watching TV. So my kids were seeing this and what's happening to mommy. And our bedroom was upstairs in our house and our bathroom was downstairs. We didn't have an upstairs bathroom. We just kind of had a loft in our house. And Peter actually had to take a bucket and put like a toilet seat on it because I couldn't go down the steps at night by myself or I would fall. And I didn't want to wake him up because his job was so demanding that, he had to be up at super early in the morning. And and sometimes he worked night shift too. So it was really hard at that point. And I was totally on the verge of losing my job. And one day, it was almost before we figured what it was, I brought my son to another migraine specialist, and they put him on medication, and it was raining that day. And my son's backpack kind of got wet from being outside. And when we came home, it was soaked. So I took all of his stuff out and, put it on the counter and put his backpack on the laundry, the dryer, just like on top of it, and just to kind of dry out so his papers and books didn't get all wet. And we were sitting on the living room floor working on a project for him, and had like, all the markers and everything on the floor. And Pete was home from work and he was about to get in a shower, and he was kind of grumpy that day, and he had like a bad day at work. And he got in the shower, and then all of a sudden I heard this like boom, and the lights kind of flickered, and then I heard Pete kind of saying an obscenity in the in the shower, like beep. And I was like, what is happening? What is happening? And all of a sudden I look over to the kitchen, and all this water starts coming through the floor. And we have a the shower head. Pete is really tall and I'm actually very short. I'm 5'1" and he's like 6'2". So we're constantly moving the shower head kind of back and forth when we would take a shower. And he kind of palm fisted it because he had like a bad day. So he kind of, palm fisted it with his hand and it popped off. And when that happened, a bunch of water went into the wall and he quickly turned it off. It wasn't on for more than, I don't know, 5 seconds. And the other side of the wall was our kitchen. And so all this water came rushing through the floor. And so we pulled out all of the appliances, and that was like the moment when we figured it out. And when we saw the wall, you could stick your finger through the drywall. It was that wet. And it didn't happen just from that little bit of water. It had been leaking in the wall. And when you looked behind all of our cabinetry, you could see all this black back there. And funny thing, Pete was the one who realized it because he had watched a Forensic Files episode on Melinda Ballard. And if nobody knows that story, she is a woman who lived in Texas and ended up having a big moldy house and ended up suing her insurance company. And it is kind of like a very historic case. And it was the one Forensic Files episode that wasn't an actual like murder. It was like mold was the thing. So he remembered that episode because he was a huge Forensic Files fan. He remembered that episode and was like, this is it. This is the thing. This is what's making us all sick. And so crazy, when that water hit the wall, there was a huge colony of Stachybotrys in that wall. And so the next couple days after that, our house progressively got worse and our health got progressively worse, like very rapidly. So we called our landlord after this incident happened, and because it also popped the electric off inside the wall. So they had a water restoration crew come, and they put a huge dehumidifier in, like one of those commercialized dehumidifiers, in the middle of our kitchen. And we were like, don't touch the wall, don't rip anything out. This is before I knew anything about anything. We were just like, please don't, just leave it. And so the next morning I wake up and this big dehumidifiers, in our kitchen and everything. And I go to get my son's backpack for him and it's covered in mold. Like, I have a picture of it that I will send you guys. And it was like the craziest thing I'd ever seen. In 24 hours, this is what grew on my son's backpack from being damp. And it kind of gives you an idea of the spore count in our house at that time, like what got disturbed and what we were breathing in. And you could taste it, like, and our lungs started burning. Like, I remember coming home from work like that next day and was like, my chest hurts. Like, do you feel that? Like, does your chest hurt? And it felt like you drank lava or something. And my son came home from school, nose starts bleeding. And 5 seconds after he walks in the door, and, he's like, I don't feel good. So we were smart enough to say, let's get the kids out of here. So I sent them to their dads, and Peter and I stayed. And over those next few days, we started to get delirious in the house. Like, Pete was standing, I remember, I'll never forget it too. He was standing in the kitchen trying to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for like 25 minutes. And he couldn't like figure out what he was doing. And I couldn't figure out what I was doing either. And we were like, what is happening? Like, we were being poisoned so intensely that, we couldn't even cognitively make simple decisions, like, we're standing here in circles trying to make a PB&J, like, come on. So we made the decision to go sleep on our like porch, which was not a part of the HVAC. It was kind of like, even though it was connected to our house, and it was not totally connected as far as the airflow, and we could shut ourselves off in there. And the next morning I woke up like in excruciating pain, and my body just was telling me, like, if you stay here, you're gonna die. Like, you need to get out. Like, you know, kind of like those scary movies where it's like, get out. Like, that's, I literally felt my body was saying, get out of this house. So we were simultaneously arguing with our landlords because, of course, they're not taking this seriously, and they had some inspectors come, and they're like, oh, it's just a little bit of mold, and you know, we can just put some bleach on it and it'll call it a day. And so I didn't have a lot of money. In fact, you know, we were the type of family that we didn't have anything to spare. You know, I couldn't afford to pay $1,000 for, you know, a fancier inspection or anything. I called around, and I finally got a company to come and just sample the mold in the wall, and it was stacky. And I couldn't afford, I had heard somewhere, I was doing all kinds of searches online, and I found this doctor in Washington, DC, who, you know, was a freshly new SIRS doctor. And she had a liaison working for her who was gracious enough to kind of talk to me a little bit about, you know, very minimal kind of education to understand, like, hey, your stuff is likely contaminated, and you know, you really shouldn't be in the house. And once I confirmed that it was Stachybotrys, that was really kind of like a strange moment for me, because it was like scary, but it was also really validating, because it was like, you know, for that whole year, I was really starting to think that I was actually crazy. And, you know, some of my doctors at that point had also said, like, this isn't your mind, and, you know, this is all psychosomatic, you know, that old chestnut. And even saying my kids were psychosomatic, and you know, there was this building narrative that I was just this exaggerating woman that is making up all these problems for my family, and that I was making my kids think that they're sick. And you know, and so when we found that, it was kind of like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. Like, there's actually a reason behind this, and it's very logical. Like, mold can create toxins. These toxins are making us sick. And so we ended up kind of just going out and being in our car. We had no place to go. And so that was kind of like, it was just a very emotional moment. And I didn't know it was about to really unfold. Nothing that I was never prepared for what was about to happen next. So
I have a question, PJ,
yeah.
because it's interesting that you were in the insurance field. And were you ever, I mean, sounds like y'all were never even educated on mold, you know, that results from water damage buildings, which obviously people call in to get claims for. So
Yeah.
when you started to learn about this, I mean, how did you feel as you went down this new rabbit hole of mold and mycotoxins?
To me, it all made exact sense. You know, like, that was one thing that, you know, I was seeking while I was sick, was science. Give me some science that I can, don't just tell me I have a grouping of symptoms. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so when I started really learning about what mold is capable of, I was literally shocked that this isn't talked about. Like, you know, it was like, why is this not mainstream? Why is this not everywhere? And then when I really started to kind of like understand the financial implications, working for an insurance company, it's all about measuring risk, right? And, if the risk gets to be too high, insurance companies will back out. For instance, a lot of insurance companies insured homes in Florida, and when they had a lot of hurricanes, they pulled out because it will make them go bankrupt if they cover all kinds of floods. This is why most insurance doesn't cover flood, and you have to get it through the National Flood Insurance Program. And it's the same thing with mold. If this were to be something that were covered, and they learned this through Melinda Ballard's case, they got sued for a hefty amount of money. And if with the level of mold that we have in our houses, statistically, it would bankrupt the insurance industry. So I think that's why they don't really teach it, because then if they did, a lot of adjusters and insurance agents would almost be intentionally malice. They would be, almost trying to think of the right word. It would be a conflict of interest to some degree, because they would be negligent and not doing their job, because if they were really educated on it, then they would be denying claims, because of that. So they just don't cover it. And I get it, from that standpoint, think about it, all the companies would go bankrupt if that were the case. And then that really opened my eyes to why a lot of doctors don't take it seriously too, is because, most of these doctors have relationships with insurance companies, and that's, people have insurance and that's how they get paid. So if they start saying, oh yes, mold is a real thing, then insurance companies can possibly drop them as, a client, and then they're not able to get those customers that take that certain insurance. So it's all interconnected. But I really, really, the next thing that happened after that, like I said, was just something I was never prepared for. So after we left the house, we threw everything out. We didn't know what I know now. And, I threw out pictures, all of our furniture, everything, clothes, my shoe collection, everything. I threw away everything because I was so sick that I was just like, I don't even care anymore. I don't care about stuff. I care about my health. I care about my kids. And I literally feel like I'm dying at this point. And, this all went down in, the beginning of November. By Christmas, I got fired from my job. We had to move into my mother-in-law's house, and I was so sick. I was bedridden at this point. Some people get better when they move out of mold. I wasn't one of those people. I got worse, got really sick, and just the stress of everything, the house, everything. It was, we were also really broke because I lost my job. That was a major part of our income. And, I even had to, my car got repossessed. I had a new car, my car got repossessed. Like, we were in financial ruin at that point. And just, it was like, I didn't know how much lower I could go. And then in January, I got served one morning with a really thick, pile of papers, and I opened it up, and it was from my kid's dad, and he said that I had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and that I was poisoning my children, that I was abusing them with supplements, and that I was mentally and emotionally abusing them, making them think that they're sick. And he had letters from my pediatrician, the school, like him and his family really went to town on me. And they were really trying to paint me like this crazy person. And I literally had a nervous breakdown when that happened, just because, trying to take away my kids, man, and it wasn't just like, hey, I want to take joint custody, or I just want to have custody and you get them on the weekends. He was pushing for supervised visitation. So that would mean that I would have to be in the presence of a social worker while I visited with my kids for an hour per week. And so I didn't have much money. We had like our tax return coming up. And so I took that and had to get a lawyer. And it was just probably the lowest point in my life, just because I was so terrified that they were going to take the kids. And, I feel so bad for my kids at that time too, because they have, like, on one side, their mom is telling them that mold made them sick, and this is the reason why they don't feel good. And then they're going to their dads for the next week, and their dad's saying, hey, mommy's poisoning you with supplements, because I was giving them like magnesium, and I was doing like coffee enemas on myself. And we had gone to that SIRS doctor in DC, and she had given us cholestyramine and kind of like the shoemaker protocol is what we were doing. And my pediatrician said that doctor was a quack, and that, SIRS wasn't real, and mold illness was fake. And, and so that caused like all these problems. And it was so terrifying. And my lawyer didn't understand either, because he was completely not versed in mold at all. And so I had to become an expert at that point to save my kids. And so I had to like put everything into researching as much as I could to figure out how mold affects the body, how does this happen in homes? And so I was like, a machine at that point, just trying to figure out how I could save my family. And, at the same time, my husband is falling apart, because he's sick, I'm sick, all this is happening with court, and we don't have a lot of money. My car just got impounded. I lost my job. We're living in a very tiny bedroom in his mom's house. The kids are sleeping on the floor on mattresses in the living room. And it was just like, the next thing you know, we have social services coming in, and because they called social services on us, and they're, looking at all of my herbs and everything that I have, and, inspecting it and telling me I have to pull my sleeves up, and they're thinking that I'm like on drugs, and because they were accusing me of being on drugs. And it was so awful. And so just, it took so much dignity away from me, because I just felt like I'm telling the truth. I'm such like a honest person that it was just like, no one believed us and then when all this started happening, everybody thought we were crazy. Our whole town, family, friends, everybody turned their back at this point. And it was so lonely. So lonely. And what do you do when you're in this situation? It wasn't like it is now. There wasn't people on Facebook. There wasn't all of these holistic practitioners that you could choose and pick from. There was no education. There wasn't books that you could buy. There was literally like an underground world of people that were talking about SIRS, and and it was very easy to kind of look up information on some of this as a topic that was not really in the best light, You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of information about Dr. Shoemaker that if you looked at this from like a very objective perspective, it's no wonder that people kind of thought like, is this really like a real thing? Are they really telling the truth? You know, who is this doctor and where did all this come from? And how come other doctors don't talk about it? And, you know, I have my kids coming to me, and it was really a very low point too, when I was trying to give my daughter some supplements, and then she looked at me and was like, what are you giving me? Like, and I was like, is this really happening? Does my daughter really think that I'm poisoning her? Does she really think that I would give her something that would hurt her? And that point in my life was probably one of the lowest points, you know, just because one of my best friends committed suicide a couple years before all this happened. And I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, I get it now. I get it. I get it. I understand why she did it, because I felt that way, you know, I wouldn't do it, but I got it, you know. It was like I related to the degree of like, this is why people do that now. I understand, because this is so lonely, and I just feel like I've lost everything that I could possibly lose. I was like, and I remember kind of being in the driveway at my mother-in-law's house, and I was screaming and crying at the same time, and kind of just fell down. And you know, it was a very dramatic moment, and I probably had like another nervous breakdown at that point, because I just was like, fine, take it all, take everything. What else do you want to take? You know, take it all from me. You know, you're stripping me down to literally nothing. And but I kept going, and I had some kind of internal strength in me to keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting. And it was just, I took it one step at a time, and tomorrow's another day. And I got back up and fought and learned everything I could. And you know, I spent enough money on my lawyer, all the money that I had to get me to a certain point. And then I had to be my own lawyer, because I didn't have any more money to give them. And I was able to actually prove, you know, that I wasn't crazy and that I wasn't on drugs. And I actually won the case. And that was like an amazing, you know, wasn't completely over, but I won. You know, I won. We agreed on joint custody, and you know, it was still a very difficult journey after that, but I won. So that was a huge win for us. And that was a big turning point for sure.
Do you think, looking back, had you not been served those papers and brought down from what you thought was probably the lowest to even a lower position, do you think that would have, if you had not been served those papers and gone down even further, would you have gotten the passion that you needed and all the education that you had to go and find to do what you're doing today, which is helping other people through this other platform, which we're going to talk about in a separate interview, you know, the PJ Harlow Wellness platform?
You know, it's hard to say, because I remember even, you know, it all kind of happened so fast. You know, it was only like we had lost the house and Christmas happened, and then boom, you know, I got served these papers. It was pretty quick the way it happened, but I think that I probably, maybe I wouldn't have learned as much as I did as fast as I did, because I was literally forced to have to like do this. But I think that I think this whole experience changed me so much that I could never go back to the way things were. And, you know, now, even though things were so difficult, I don't think I would change things. Sometimes I think we're meant to go through certain things. I mean, maybe this is just the way my life goes. I feel like I go through these really low points, and then they're a huge part in what makes who I am. You know, there's that saying, from the ashes of disaster come the roses of success, you know, kind of like the cliche phoenix, right? And so, at least for me, I feel like I learn and I grow in the dark, just like mold. And ironically, and I have just, I learned so much from that experience, but also just my education, that I truly think there's something magical about it, that it's all connected. And you know, when I look back at before, you know, I was asking for change. I didn't like my job. Even though I was happy in my relationship, there were other areas of my life that I wasn't happy. I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't feel fulfilled in that. And sometimes, you know, I think that God has a different plan for us, you know, and we might think we're driving the ship. And I definitely have control issues. That's part of who I am. I'm very type A, but I think that there was another story for me. And so I don't regret it. I don't regret what happened. Certainly, I wish things happened maybe a little bit differently, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, that's an interesting question, an interesting thought. I don't know.
I just want to say that everything that you have shared so far really is, I think it makes you the epitome of what a hope warrior is. And for Malachi's Message Foundation, that's a huge part of what we want to share with people, is that there is hope from all of this. And just what a beautiful outlook and perspective, you know, being able to look back and reflect on everything that happened. You have been tested so, so much. And to have this positive outlook and to not look backwards and necessarily regret everything that's happened because it did lead you to where you are today, that is just incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that hope with everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think that's really important too, to kind of hear the other side of it. You know, now we are, geez, 7, 8 years since this happened. Well, wait a minute, I'm 49. So man, we're getting up there at this point. But you know, things are I think that all of these things happen, like I said, for a reason. Even my kids now, you know, that was a very informative years. I mean, they were teenagers when this all happened. And so it's a very kind of memorable time in your life, is when you're a teenager. And for my kids, they were in a very kind of state of disarray, of unstable kind of, just everything was just crazy at that point. But I see how much stronger my kids are. And, you know, it's amazing to me now that they're young adults and living on their own. And, you know, my daughter is, you know, 21, and she lives in New York. And it's so crazy. She's like, Mom, we were looking at new apartments and you'd be so proud of me. I looked at the mini split, and, you know, I inspected with my flashlight under the sink, and the realtor didn't even understand what I was doing. And I said no to this one place. And it's like, this is a 21-year-old, you know, going through all of this. And it's just like, I just feel very grateful that everything turned out the way that it did. And I think that, like I said, we go through some of these things, and it's really about, what do you do with that pain, right? We can't prevent painful things from happening in our life. And sometimes we go through some real tragedies. And but on the other side of that, it's what you do with that, and what you use that pain as either a good or a bad. And I've tried to take that and use it as a way to help other people, so it doesn't go to waste, so it isn't like sacrificed for nothing. So even though maybe it didn't help me go through it easier, maybe it can help other people, and they don't have to. I really truly feel like this doesn't have to be a traumatic experience. It can actually be empowering experience. And so that's what I really try to give to other people from my own experience.
I was going to ask you this question. I'm still going to ask you just in case there is something in addition you want to leave off with, but I was going to ask you if there's something that you could tell other people that are currently going through mold, something important that you would want them to know
Sure.
while going through it.
Sure.
What would that be?
Yeah. One of the first things I would say is that not everybody is the same. So I know that when you're going through this, oftentimes you look to social media to try to relate and to try to kind of find some comfort and just to not feel so alone. But just remember that whoever you're looking to, that's not your story. And everybody, there's a spectrum when it comes to mold illness and how it affects you and your home, and everybody's situation is individually unique and different. So that's really important to recognize, especially when you're trying to find solutions and find the right people to work with and to find the right answers. They're going to be unique to you. So you really have to take that into consideration. And additionally, it won't always be like this. This is temporary. This is one part of your life. So again, while it's a really hard thing to go through, it's not going to be like this forever. And so there is hope on the other side, and there's a way to get through it. And there's a lot of awesome people here that can help you too. There's a lot of help out there, and definitely, pass the baton, get people to help you, definitely don't try to do it all on your own. I think that we live in an amazing time where you can find information at your fingertips, but at least for me, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I have to do it all, because I have a hard time delegating, because it's just the control in me. And I think it's important to get people to help you through this. You can't do it alone. This isn't something that you can do by yourself. Even if you're the best researcher in the world, you really do need a team of people to help you through this. And so that's okay. It's okay to ask for help too.
I just want to ask one question before we say goodbye to you for this episode. And it's a question that is burning for me. And I feel like probably other people that are listening are going to be curious. People who are just starting this journey. You have been so positive and optimistic. So I expect you to be very candid and honest with your answer. But you mentioned how you felt so isolated and how everybody in your community turned their back on you, family, friends. And I know from experience, I felt that way to a certain extent. But did that change for you after you had this victory with your legal battle and the custody of your children? Did you notice a shift in the people that were around you? Did anybody ever come back to you and get back into your community? Or do you feel like you had to rebuild your community, your circle?
Thank you for asking that. That was one area where things didn't really go back. And, it's hard to say, is it me or is it them, right? Because when you change and you go through such a transformation, you can't expect everybody to change too. And I think that I changed so much that it just wasn't the same, you know? And I have a set of, I guess, ideals or metrics of what I require in a friendship. And one of them is loyalty. And that's really, really important to me. So I don't know, it's kind of like when you learn all of this stuff, you know, and it really truly does change you as a person. It changes your perspective on things, on so many other topics, and we touch lightly on them: politics, you know, all of these, the friendships, relationships, you know, even schools and how you want to teach your kids and things like that. And when you really kind of, you know, you get woke to some degree, but you know, as far as like my friendships and my relationships, a lot of them didn't come back and say, hey, we're sorry, we didn't believe you. And that was a hard part to swallow. But I have amazing relationships and amazing friendships and just colleagues and just people that I just love to pieces. And I'm good with that. You know, I think that sometimes some people are meant to be in your life for some periods, and you know, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's okay. You know, they were my friends for when they needed to be my friends, and they were in my life for that period. And now I'm a different person now. And so I surround myself with people that inspire me and people that I want to be like, and that's okay too. And so I want people to, sometimes you have to go inwards during this period, and I don't want people to waste time trying to get people to almost like give them permission, you know? And I think it's more just about like being comfortable in who you are. And again, this is kind of like a lesson that sometimes opens your eyes to like, hey, maybe this person isn't who I thought they were. And maybe they don't have the same idea of a friendship as what I do. And that can become very clear when you go through something like this. You know, some people don't want to be there for you in times when you need them. And maybe that means you need to get some new friends. And I did. And so, but I'm good with that.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, PJ, for coming on and sharing your personal mold story. It's incredible. You've been through so much, and now we all know why you have so much passion to be out there doing what you're doing and helping so many people that are going through it.
Yeah, I think that you know, it's hard to tell your story too, just because, you know, there's so many parts to this that I could probably tell it in an even longer version that's 3 hours, you know, to give so many other details to it. But I think that it's truly a transformation. And that's how kind of I look at it, like a metamorphosis of some sort. And, you know, it's kind of how I look at mold too. And it's helped my relationship with not being fearful of mold, of just really understanding that it's part of nature, and it's literally transforming things for rebirth. You know, if we didn't have mold as part of our natural cycles of life, then, you know, we probably wouldn't be here. You know, it's an important part of the whole cycle, you know. So I don't know, I guess I get kind of spiritual with it and get really connected into nature, but I think that's truly helped me. Well, I know it's helped me from really moving from a space of like, oh, mold is out to get me, when I truly don't think that anymore. I don't think it's out to get anybody. I think it's just doing its job. And when you really understand that, then I think that it helps a little bit, you know.
Thank you so much. We absolutely look forward to having you back for part 2 and learning all about how you are helping people today, taking that pain and making it into purpose. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your personal story behind what got you into the mold space. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.